I'd like to congratulate Panama as it assumes its presidency and wish it great success. Lately, Russia and Ukraine held several rounds of direct negotiations, reached some consensus on humanitarian issues such as the exchange of the prisoners of war, and made positive progress. At the same time, the crisis persists, and the end of the war is nowhere in sight. Large quantities of weapons and ammunition continue to flow into the battlefield, causing new casualties and damage to infrastructure. It worries us to see the expanding variety and range of weapons flowing to the battlefield, as well as their growing lethality and destructive power. It was reported lately that both sides have deployed combat robots on the battlefield, further showing that Russia-Ukraine conflict is increasingly becoming a testing ground for new weapons, and how war is fought could undergo dangerous changes. I wish to reiterate that weapons may win wars, but they cannot bring about lasting peace. The reckless supply of weapons to the battlefield will only intensify confrontation, prolong the conflict, and cause risks of proliferation, and inflict further casualties and suffering on the people of both sides and the broader region. The urgent priority is for both sides to work together to de-escalate the situation on the battlefield as soon as possible. They should maintain the momentum of talks, continue to build a consensus, and ultimately reach a comprehensive, lasting, and binding peace agreement. President, since the first day of the war, China has actively advocated resolving disputes by peaceful means and called on the parties to the conflict to end hostilities, start negotiations, and restore peace sooner than later. Over the past 3 years, guided by the principle for sure laid out by President Xi Jinping, we have worked actively for peace and pushed for talks. China will continue to work with the international community to play a constructive role for an early political settlement of the crisis. President, earlier, the U.S. representative once again spread false and slanderous narratives against China. It is completely unacceptable. At previous meetings, I responded to such accusations time and again. Since the U.S. did it again today, I am compelled to respond again to set the record straight. First, China did not start the Ukraine crisis and is not a party to it. China has never supplied lethal weapons to either side of the conflict and has strictly controlled export of dual-use goods, including drones. Second, the parties to the conflict are not under Council sanctions. China has normal trade relations with Russia and Ukraine. By doing so, it doesn't violate international law or breach its international obligations. China's legitimate rights and interests must not be infringed upon. In fact, till now, the U.S. has continued its economic and trade activities with Russia. If the U.S. is doing that itself, why it doesn't allow others to do the same? You can set fire to houses while others can't even light lamps. Is that the logic? Third, the Ukraine crisis is at a critical juncture where we see prospects and hopes for a political solution. It is not right for the U.S. to expect China to play a role in putting early end to the war, but never cease its smear and pressurizing tactics against China. We once again urge the U.S. to stop its pointless blame game, stop shifting responsibilities, and play a more constructive role for the end of the fighting and for the peace talks. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for the statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of Pakistan. I would also like to welcome the representative of Ukraine to this meeting. Colleagues, the Council is meeting yet again to discuss the Ukraine conflict and the dynamics surrounding it. Pakistan remains deeply concerned over the continuation of this conflict, which has tragically affected the lives of millions of people in the region and beyond. Just last week in this very chamber, we met to discuss the devastating humanitarian and security consequences of this ongoing conflict. The persistent use of advanced weaponry and disregard for the IHL and its principles has intensified the human suffering exponentially. I would like to emphasize that protection of civilians is not only a moral imperative, but also a legal obligation. International law, especially international humanitarian law, makes it incumbent upon the parties to protect civilians and civilian infrastructure. The targeting of civilians is neither acceptable nor justified under any circumstances. The conduct of hostilities, the means and methods of warfare must remain within the confines of international law, especially the fundamental IHL principles of distinction, proportionality, and precaution. We firmly believe that military means cannot resolve this conflict. The only viable path towards sustainable peace is that of dialogue and diplomacy. That was the message of Security Council Resolution 2774 adopted in February related to this conflict. And here in the Council, we also reaffirmed our commitment to peaceful settlement of disputes through Resolution 2788 only last week. Colleagues, Pakistan's position on the Ukraine conflict has remained clear and consistent. We have always advocated for de-escalation and immediate cessation of hostilities and a comprehensive ceasefire, holding of meaningful negotiations that address mutual security concerns within the framework of the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, and adopting a path of inclusive and constructive diplomacy involving key regional and international stakeholders to promote trust and build confidence to pave the way for a just and lasting peace. Istanbul talks must be built upon and taken forward with genuine and reciprocal commitment to peace. Pakistan reiterates its firm support for a peaceful resolution of this conflict and stands ever ready to support all efforts towards that end. I would now resume my functions as President of the Council. Colleagues, the representative of the United States has asked for the floor to make a further statement. I give them the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Materials and components supplied by China are ending up in Russian weapons, which Russia is using to strike Ukraine, killing civilians and destroying infrastructure. If China is uncomfortable being mentioned in our remarks, it should stop enabling Russia to prolong the war. China has said many times that it wants peace. I urge China to bring its actions into line with its words. China's direct actions supplying Russia with the materials it needs to carry on the war make peace difficult to achieve. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United States for that statement. I would now give the floor to the representative of China, who has requested a statement.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think in my response just now, I made it very clear. Security Council has not imposed the sanctions on parties to the conflict. China maintains normal trade with Ukraine and Russia. It is not in violation of international law, nor does it breach any international obligation. The U.S. is also conducting trade with Ukraine, so why can't China do that? It is totally normal trade. Actually, it is not China who should feel uncomfortable. It should be the U.S. who feels uncomfortable. In this very chamber of the Security Council, the U.S. keeps on slandering and smearing other countries and accusing other countries. Shouldn't you feel out of tune with the rest of the members here? To resolve the Ukraine crisis, what needed is unity and cooperation rather than division or confrontation. And once again, urge the U.S. representative to stop attacking other countries, and stop scapegoating other countries.
Instead, you should focus on working more for diplomacy, to work more for peace and talks for peace and for ceasefire. Thank you.
Thank the representative of China for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Security Council is meant to meet and discuss real problems, threats to international peace and security. And the name of the real problem is written on that country nameplate, Russian Federation. There are no two parties attacking civilians. There is one country, Russia, one problem for peace and security in Ukraine, in our region, and globally. Just last night, on the eve of this meeting, Russia unleashed yet another ruthless assault on Ukraine, with 309 UAVs and 8 cruise missiles from different directions. As of now, 11 people were killed in the attack on Kyiv, with the death toll rising and 1 child among them. Another 135 civilians were wounded across the capital, including 11 children. Ukraine has requested the presidency to convene a separate Security Council meeting to discuss these real attacks on peace and security. Let us be clear here. Today's meeting, convened at the request of the Russian Federation, is both cynical and morally repugnant. The very state that launched the largest war of aggression in Europe since the World War II now attempts to portray itself as a victim of so-called Western interference. This is not only a grotesque distortion of reality, which is used by the Russian state for years. It is also an insult to the multilateralism, to the United Nations, to the principles enshrined in the Charter, to all of you, distinguished members of the Security Council. But above all, to the memory of the tens of thousands of Ukrainians who were killed as a result of Russia's war of aggression. We should make no mistake, Russia has no genuine interest in peace. If it did, it could end its war at any moment. But instead, it continues to pursue conquest, domination, and the total destruction of a sovereign state, Ukraine. Let us also recall the basics. In this century alone, Russia has invaded Ukraine twice. First in 2014 with the illegal occupation of Crimea and parts of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. Then again in 2022 when it launched a full-scale war of aggression. These actions represent blatant violations of the UN Charter and the core principles of international law. You all agree to that. At this very moment, Russia is still trying to illegally occupy more Ukrainian territory. It bombs cities, targets civilian infrastructure, kills innocent people every single day. It has staged sham referenda, denied Ukraine's sovereignty, and works openly to erase our independence and statehood. And yet, while committing these egregious violations, it dares to accuse others of undermining peace. Mr. President, simultaneously, the Kremlin continues to fuel its war of aggression and draw other actors into its campaign of terror. Since 2022, Iran has supplied the Russian Federation with hundreds of unmanned aerial vehicles, flagrantly violating Security Council Resolution 2231, while its restrictions remained in force. This impunity for gross violations of international law by both Russia and Iran has emboldened others, particularly the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, to exploit the situation and advance their own destabilizing agendas. Since 2023, the regimes in Moscow and Pyongyang have significantly deepened their military and military technical cooperation, including unlawful arms transfers and the reported deployment of North Korean military personnel in support of Russia's armed aggression against Ukraine. Russia's war machine is now being sustained by Iran and the DPRK in direct violation of multiple Security Council resolutions and the foundational norms of international law. It receives drones, missiles, and ammunition from these regimes, as well as dual-use goods and equipment supplied by Chinese companies. This enables Moscow to prolong its war and escalate the suffering of our people. We continue to recover foreign manufactured components from Russian missiles and drones used to strike our civilian infrastructure. This stark reality highlights the urgent need for coordinated international action to halt the flow of materials and technologies that fuel Russia's armed aggression. Mr. President, let us speak plainly about Russia's true motives. Its war of aggression is not about so-called protection of Russian-speaking population, denazification, or demilitarization of Ukraine. And it is not about NATO. Russia claims it invaded Ukraine to prevent NATO expansion. Yet by its actions, it has achieved the opposite. Russia now shares hundreds of kilometers of new border with NATO. And of course, it is not about so-called security concerns of the Russian Federation. Because what security guarantees are needed for the largest nuclear-armed state in the world, whose officials have repeatedly threatened to use these nuclear weapons against Ukraine and other states. At its core, this war is about the survival of the Kremlin's authoritarian regime, which has ruled the Russian Federation with an iron grip for over a quarter of a century. It is also about imperialistic ambitions of Russia, which tries to eliminate Ukraine as a state from the political map of the world and to destroy Ukrainians as a nation. Faced with the domestic stagnation, a shrinking economy, demographic decline, and rising political dissent, the Kremlin chose war as a tool of distraction and repression. Russian justifications for the war we have been hearing since 2014 are pure lies. What Putin and his regime truly seek are consolidation of power, violence, absence of freedom in Russia and in the countries bordering with Russia. And this is why Russia is consciously continuing this war, losing every day over 1,000 of its own soldiers on the battlefield. Overall, it has already lost over 1 million soldiers. Moscow regime doesn't care about them and is ready to sacrifice even more of these very reasons. Distinguished members of the Security Council, the Moscow regime will not stop on its own. Left unchallenged, it will continue down a path of killing and destruction, aggression, occupation, rape, torture, the deportation of children, and the systematic violation of international law and the UN Charter. We will continue to defend our people, Ukraine's sovereignty, and future of our children. We seek a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace, grounded in the principles of the UN Charter, and nothing less. We repeat, a full, immediate, and unconditional ceasefire is essential. It is the first step to halting Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. Peace will not come through appeasement or equalizing the aggressor and its victim. It will come through unity of the free world, determination, and justice. The UN Security Council has a critical role to play here. Its voice must be strong, its stance unmistakable. This war must end, peace must prevail, and international law must be upheld. Accountability served. Without such clarity and resolve from the Council, no combination of pressure, sanctions, or military support can deliver durable results. A just and lasting peace begins with a firm and unified message from this body. That is why we call on all members of this Council to support a French-initiated resolution calling for a full, immediate, and unconditional ceasefire between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. A ceasefire that would apply on land, at sea, and in the air, creating the necessary conditions for peace in accordance with the UN Charter. Now is the time for this Council to come together and to demonstrate the unity and resolve needed to help end this war. In the meantime, we are profoundly grateful to all our partners and allies. Your military support is not only a lifeline for Ukraine, it is a defense of international law and the rules-based order, where aggression is not rewarded. There is only one path to ending this war. Russia must be pushed back, economically, with strong sanctions, politically, and militarily. It has to be demilitarized. This country is a threat to all of you. If we fail to stop Russia now, its armed aggression will not end with Ukraine. Others will be emboldened, and the world will become a far more dangerous place for us all. We also must make sure that existing sanctions are enforced. How is it possible that Russian individuals under sanctions, those who directly support and enable this war, are still flying freely and participating in international events as if nothing happened? What message does that send to the aggressor and to the victims? Mr. President, at last week's Security Council meeting, the Russian Federation said nothing about ending the war, not a single word. Instead, it obsessively fixated on Ukraine's internal affairs. Today, it pretends talking peace with one hand and killing innocent civilians in a sovereign state with another. This obsession is revealing Russia cannot stand Ukraine's development, democracy, language, or identity. Its goal is to destroy everything we have built. We often hear, no one will win this war. We see it differently. International law must win. The UN Charter must win. The principles of sovereignty, territorial integrity, inviolability of internationally recognized borders, and the independence of states must win. Because if Ukraine's borders are not secure, will yours be? This war is not only about territory. It is about domination, repression, and fear. The Moscow regime's insatiable hunger for occupying foreign lands exposes its deep-rooted greed. Despite Russia being the largest country in the world by landmass, it still fails to provide basic well-being and security for its own people, and cannot manage its own territories, many of which are in state of decline. Do not fear Russia. Do not let yourselves be misled or manipulated by its propaganda and paralyzed by its threats, including the rhetoric you have heard also at today's meeting. The only way to end this war is to confront its cause, Russia's aggression, with unity, resolve, and action. Let us make sure that a year from now, we are not gathered here to count more victims, but to mark the restoration of peace, justice, and security, not only for Ukraine, but for the entire international system. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Ukraine for the statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. Colleagues, before adjourning the meeting, as this is the last scheduled meeting of the Council for the month of July so far, I would like to express the sincere appreciation of the delegation of Pakistan to the members of the Council and to our colleagues in the Secretariat of the Council for all the support that they have given us throughout the month. Indeed, it has been a busy month and one in which we rallied to consensus on several important issues within our purview. The Council also unanimously reaffirmed and upheld the purposes and principles of the Charter and our commitment and support for peaceful settlement of disputes. We could not have achieved all of that without the hard work, cooperation, and positive contributions of every delegation and the very efficient assistance of the representatives of the Secretariat, including the technical support team, conference services, officers, interpreters, translators, verbatim reporters, and the security staff. As we end our presidency, I know I speak on behalf of all colleagues in the Council in wishing Ambassador Eloy Alfaro de Elba and the Panamanian delegation good luck in the month of August. The meeting is adjourned. I like it.